As we begin today's conversations with community leaders, I remind you to put any questions you might have for me or my guests in the Q&A so they can be addressed. Today, I'm pleased to bring you a conversation with Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer. DA Spitzer has a long-standing reputation as an advocate for victims' rights. He's chaired the groundbreaking campaign for Proposition 9, Marsy's Law, the nation's most comprehensive Victims' Bill of Rights, and served as the state chair for Proposition 83, the nation's toughest sex offender punishment and control law, as well as Proposition 69, which requires collection of DNA samples from all felons. DA Spitzer also co-authored Megan's Law on the Internet and landmark legislation requiring the release of public information related to sex offenders as when he was a former deputy and assistant district attorney. He's handled many management and prosecution of many cases. He's dedicated his life to keeping families safe and has inspired his dedicated public service career as an Orange County Board of Supervisor and a California State Assembly member, and now as Orange County's district attorney. It's my pleasure to welcome Todd Spitzer as today's guest. Todd, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa. It's very kind, and I want to congratulate you on a distinguished career. A chapter is going to close, and obviously a new one, and many more are going to open for you. So thank you for your service to the chamber, and we're just wishing you best wishes for all your future endeavors. So thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you, Todd.
So when I was on the Brea School Board and lived in Brea, I lived in the north part of the county. I live in the central part of the county now, so I didn't go to South County, although I represented North and South Orange County for many, many years, whether it was on the Board of Supervisors or obviously on the school board in Brea. And so now, I'm in this very interesting job called the district attorney. And I want to talk about it today because I'm not really sure people understand just how significant and impactful the district attorney's office on our quality of life. I'm sure many of you are aware of the recent apprehension of the two individuals who have now been charged by me for the shooting of Aiden Leos on the freeway just on May 21st. So, we're very, very pleased those individuals are in custody, and I could talk more about the case if anybody's interested in the chat later. But I really want you to understand the district attorney's office and what we're all about and why we exist. There's a lot of discussions today in American society about law enforcement, support of police, the future of the police, and also prosecutors' offices. And I think it's really important to understand what we're all about. We're going to screen share here, and I'm going to show you just some things about the district attorney's office. We are the largest law firm in Orange County. So from time, it fluctuates. Right now, we're at about 275 attorneys. We're down a little bit because of just attrition, natural attrition, and hiring freezes. During the pandemic, the county was uncertain about its future. I am reliant on Prop 172, which is the half-cent sales tax dedicated for public safety. So the sheriff gets 80% of the half-cent sales tax, and my office gets 20%. And we rely on that for about 50% of our budget. So it's very, very significant. I have a $150 million a year budget, very much like the chamber, right, Teresa? And yeah, right. And we usually have about 900 employees, and we're down to about 785. At any particular time, we're prosecuting, about 45,000 cases a year, but we actually touch about 70,000 cases a year. Certainly, every case that's submitted to us for prosecution, we don't prosecute. We either reject it for further investigation, or we reject it because we don't believe we can prove that particular case with our legal burden beyond a reasonable doubt. That's one thing I should probably emphasize. It's many of you might be familiar because you're in business with civil litigation. In civil litigation, that's two parties which enter into a dispute. And usually the remedy is what we call money damages. Somebody pays somebody for a loss. That's how we in society deal with compensation. Sometimes it's an injunction. You can't build on my side of the property because you don't have an ownership interest. But those are civil remedies. We do civil, and I'll talk about that. We do environmental law. We prosecute polluters. We prosecute economic crimes. Right now we're in the opioid litigation. We're actually in trial as we speak, discussing and debating whether the opioid manufacturers are going to be responsible for compensating Orange County for its increased medical costs associated with fighting opioid abuse and dealing with people who are hospitalized from the overuse and abuse of opioids. But our burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. So in civil, it's more likely than not. It's just tipping the scales just a little bit more in favor of one party over another. With us, we have to show overwhelming evidence of a person's guilt. And when I was picking juries in my career, and we had to talk about what the standard is, there's a jury instruction, but basically I would say to people, look, you want to feel that you made the right decision 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, because you're making that decision to a moral certainty. So it's a very, very high standard. And people say, sometimes, why didn't you file charges? My goodness, that person's guilty. Well, we don't get to just stand up and declare that in court. We actually have to produce admissible evidence that proves that. Next slide. The mission statement of the district attorney's office is basically twofold. It's obviously to protect the public, and it's also to get justice for crime victims. Now, as we are the government lawyer, we are not the lawyer for a party. We're not the lawyer for the victim. Some people believe that we are there in court arguing and advocating for the identified victim. We certainly advocate for the victim in the sense that we're representing the people of the state of California, but we're not the lawyer for the victim. So, in civil, you can tell your lawyer something, and generally it's protected by the attorney-client privilege. We have no attorney-client privilege with the victim. We don't represent as lawyers the victim. We represent this nebulous entity we call the people of the state of California. Next slide. I'm not going to go through my org chart, but what I want you to appreciate just is the diversity and the complexity of the office. It's massive. I'm not only the district attorney, I'm also the public administrator. The public administrator is the one that oversees a person's estate when they die without a will and without heirs. And so we will distribute their property, but we don't have any direction because they died without a will. My advice is always have a will and always express what your wishes are. In California, even if you write it on a piece of paper, sign it and date it and tuck it into a drawer, you should probably have it witnessed. That would be smart, but that's called a holographic will. Please always indicate what you want to happen to your property when you pass. So on the far left, I have about 150 sworn police officers that work for me. They're supervised by Paul Walters. He's the chief. He was the chief of the Santa Ana Police Department. He was the city manager for the city of Santa Ana, and he was County Supervisor Lisa Bartlett's chief of staff. We have our training unit in Operations 2, our appellate division, our conviction integrity. I already said public administrator. We have our felony panel. That's the group of lawyers who prosecute what we call our generic felonies. We have our vertical units where we prosecute with specialty certain kinds of crimes. I'll describe those in a minute. We also have our branch court. So in North Orange County, you have a court at Fullerton Courthouse, where on Harbor Boulevard in downtown Fullerton. We have the Central Courthouse in Santa Ana, the Harbor Courthouse in Newport Beach, and the Westminster Courthouse in the city of Westminster. And so we staff all those courts as well. The main courthouse is in Santa Ana. That's where I am right now. My office is at 300 North Flower. I share property with the Sheriff's Department. We're kind of the law enforcement complex. And across the street from my office is the jail. I have a gang unit. We prosecute gang crimes, major fraud and environmental fraud, like I indicated, polluters, code enforcement, real estate fraud. So if you're a realtor, we work very closely with the North Orange County Realtors, South Orange County Realtors. There has been a lot of real estate fraud ever since we had, the whole loan debacle in the 2008, 2009 time period. I have a whole juvenile division because, of course, young people do commit crime. And then you'll see in the central operations, I have a science and technology unit where we utilize the latest technology like DNA to solve crimes. You may have read the University of California, Irvine, a legal clinic sued me, tried to get me to try to stop me from using DNA to on low level. What I do is if you committed a low level crime in exchange for a swab and your DNA, I'll dismiss the charges. The greatest deterrent from people committing future crimes is them knowing we have their DNA. If we have your DNA and you commit another crime like a burglary, a robbery, a rape, a murder, we're going to know. And we have utilized that DNA from other low-level crimes to solve very serious crimes. We solved the murder and we solved the rape from the DNA we collected from low-level offenders. So it can be very, very powerful to solve crime as well as to deter crime. We have family protection unit, human trafficking, homicide, murder, special prosecution. So I prosecute the politicians, the city managers. You may have read and remember one of our city managers in Fullerton was under the influence of alcohol, crashed his car. There was a little bit of a cover-up, and the DA's office prosecuted that case. So you hear from time to time a city council member doesn't live in their district. Fullerton has districts. Almost all the cities are going to go to districts. They're required to. Santa Ana, I prosecuted a city councilman, and he had to resign his office because he registered to run for office in a district in which he had a fake address. So we do that. That's our job. We prosecute police officers for misconduct as well. You might have seen, I don't think it was in today's paper, but it's online. I just filed criminal charges against a Garden Grove police officer for roughing up homeless people. He was hitting them in the back of the head. He was pulling their hair. He was denigrating them. And that's just intolerable behavior. So sometimes I prosecute police officers for filing fraudulent workers' compensation claims. So we handle all these very, very sensitive, very interesting and high profile prosecutions. I have my sex crimes unit. And then, of course, on the far right, my administrative support staff. Next slide. So I'm not going to go into this, but I just want you to know it exists. On my website, on the homepage, there's a link to really the principles that I believe a prosecutor should stand for and what our job is. And I think there's a mistake sometimes. There's a couple, I think, misperceptions. One of them is that while I work very, very closely with the police, I'm not the police. Even though I have a police department inside the district attorney's office, our job is to evaluate the conduct of the police work and then determine whether or not we can file charges based upon the police work. For example, in the Aiden Leo's case, a little boy that was killed on the 55, during those 2 weeks, the CHP was looking for those suspects. My office was reviewing search warrants, signing off on search warrants, advising the CHP, working with the CHP. So we work hand in glove with police agencies, but we then step back and evaluate the police investigation, and then we determine whether or not we can file charges. So we're not the police. And another sometimes misperception is that we will do anything to get a conviction. And that's just not true. We are vigorous, zealous advocates of protecting the public. But I said this on KFI when I was talking about the charges in this Aiden Leo's case. I charged the shooter with murder, and I charged the driver, the woman, with accessory after the fact. In other words, hiding herself and working to hide the car and other things for those 2 weeks we were looking for her. And so she's an accessory after the fact. I do not charge or overcharge a case in order to then leverage that with somebody so I can knock down the charges and get them to plead guilty to something. I just don't that is unethical. It's completely inappropriate. We don't do that. And so I hope you appreciate, as citizens of Orange County, and some of you may not be, and you may own businesses or work in the North Orange County area, but the role of a prosecutor is one of the most powerful and important positions in society. Police can arrest you. I hope that never happens to you. But you can only be held but for 48 hours before you have to be arraigned on some charges. But it's my office that determines, and argues for bail in court. We argue for what the sentence should be. And we have the ability to really influence the outcome of your life and your freedom. And when somebody like myself and my other prosecutors have that much power in government, it's our real important moral responsibility to handle that power with absolute responsibility. You don't mess around at all with that level of power. Next slide. So after I got elected, there was a lot of issues that I had presented themselves to me from the past administration. And I've been focusing on restoring the credibility of the district attorney's office, establishing goodwill in the community, and allocating resources appropriately. So I established what's called the Conviction Integrity Unit. It's really a best practice of prosecutors. When I started in the district attorney's office 32 years ago, which is pretty hard to believe, right? I mean, I started here in 1990. I did a lot of other things before I came back, but I was here for 6 years, my first time. And when I was trained as a prosecutor that long ago, I was told to do as many jury trials as possible, get as many convictions as you can, and handle as many cases. And basically, it was like a conveyor belt of justice. I really didn't think about my cases once there was a sentencing. I was done with it. Well, that's not fair to the person that was convicted or to society. With the advent of DNA, there's things that come up, new evidence, a witness, DNA. You heard Teresa talking about, I was a statewide co-chair of Prop 69. That's the initiative now where we take an arrestee felon, their DNA, and we put it in the database. DNA has not only convicted people and led to convictions and arrests and all that, it has also been extremely helpful in exonerating the innocent, people who have been in prison or jail for crimes that we had doubt as a result of DNA evidence. So it is very powerful to help us prosecute and also to exonerate. So the conviction integrity will look at a case that was adjudicated in the past, and we will reopen it if we feel there's additional evidence that warrants looking at that case again. Next slide, please. I also have a victim ombudsman. The victim ombudsman, so when you handle 70,000 cases a year, there are people who are affected by that event who are not happy with our decision. They don't think we filed the right charges. They're frustrated we won't file charges. There are people who are angry at me in this community from time to time because they don't think I did enough or I didn't bring the right charges. And our job is to explain to the victim, generally it's the victim, why we did what we did and what the basis for our decision was. Sometimes that satisfies an individual and sometimes it doesn't. It goes with the territory. It is an upsetting event for me as a person who has spent his entire career, 30 plus years professionally, fighting for crime victims. But my job, again, I don't represent the victim. You can't hire me to take your case. It doesn't work that way in the criminal law. You can do that for a defense attorney to defend you, but you cannot hire a prosecutor to prosecute a case. And the reason society set it up that way is you wouldn't want somebody to be able to pay to prosecute somebody. You want your prosecutor to be completely impartial. And you don't want your prosecutor to take sides. You want your prosecutor to do justice. So let's go to the Be Well, slide 7. So you should be very pleased that we now have in North Orange County, it's actually in Orange, Placentia is going to have a facility, but we have a mental health facility actually, I take that back. Placentia is going to open up its homeless shelter, but in partnership with Fullerton and some other cities. I think Placentia, it might include Buena Park, I'm not exactly sure. And that will be, I think it's in the city of Placentia. That's a homeless shelter, but we have this mental health campus now in the city of Orange, and it's in my old supervisorial district. So I didn't personally build it, but I oversaw the building of the first homeless shelter in Orange County on Little Kramer Place in Anaheim in my supervisorial district. And then I approved the purchase of the land and the building where Be Well is now, and they tore the building down and built a new campus, and it's lovely. And it's a very, very important part of our continuum of care to help individuals. So let me give you an example. When I was a police officer for the city of Los Angeles, if somebody was drunk in public or under the influence of drugs, and I just didn't think I didn't want to take them to jail, I could drive them to what is called the Weingart Center in downtown LA, and they could get sober there, get counseling, get a decent meal, get cleaned up, get fresh clothes, whatever. Those kinds of things that are important to our psyche. And a social worker or counselor would talk to them about changing their lifestyle to try to get on the straight and narrow. We now have that in Orange County where the police can take somebody in a very similar situation. We have a sobering station. They can sleep off or work off that under the influence and then make a decision at that location if they want to transfer their life to a life where they fight their addiction. And it doesn't happen the first time. It doesn't happen the second time they're arrested or detained. Sometimes it has 60 visits before you nearly overdose and you decide, you finally get the attention and you decide to change your life. Next slide. And then I'll take questions. You may not know, we have all these different courts in Orange County to help people that are specialty courts for people who find themselves in special situations. And I created a new unit called the Recidivism Reduction Unit. My goal is to keep people out of the system, to get them help when they're in their crises. And so we have our collaborative courts where we deal with the veterans, people who have been in the military, drunk, people under the influence of alcohol, people who use drugs, our homeless court. These are courts that are designed to deal with individuals who have special needs, and they're tailored to help those individuals with special needs. And so I guess I will say before I take questions, our county, I run the third biggest district attorney's office in California. I fight back and forth with San Diego. We kind of go back and forth in population. LA, of course, is the big bogey. They're the biggest in the country. And then this is the 6th largest DA's office in the entire country. So, I mean, this is a significant prosecutor's office. And we're doing extremely good work, not only to protect the public. We live in probably the safest, if not one of the safest counties in America. But we live next door to a county to the north where the DA up there has a very different philosophy than I do about public safety. And that's why I believe up there in LA, homicides are up 300%, carjackings are up substantially, burglaries are up substantially. LA County is a mess. And I will not allow under my watch Orange County to become like Los Angeles County, which is why you may recall I cleared the riverbed next to Angel Stadium when I was a county supervisor, built the homeless shelter, and required people to go to the homeless shelter in exchange for my ability lawfully to clear up the riverbed. There was no way I was going to allow that riverbed with those tents and everything else to be the gateway to North Orange County. That is not what I want people to see or think about when they come to Orange County. I want them to be see that this is a vibrant economic center with tourism and jobs and a lot of commerce and activity that you want to do business here. You go to LA, once you drive past across the border and get into Norwalk, all the way to East Los Angeles, it is a much different landscape. I do not and will not allow Orange County to look like that. Okay, so Teresa, are you gonna field these?
I am, thanks. And thank you for a great presentation. I know that the North County Spas, they call it, it's the area where they are working with the homeless, is opening this shelter in Placentia. And they have another one that's opened in Buena Park. The Illumination Foundation just opened a site in Fullerton as well. How many people have been through the Be Well facility since it opened, or do you know?
So Be Well opened, I want to say we did it during COVID. It's been about 2 months, 3 months. And the exact numbers that healthcare and social services are processing through their programs, I can't tell you exactly. But the idea from my office's participation is to be able to say, for example, let's take that person that's under the influence of drugs. That's a crime, being under the influence of drugs in a public place. It's a low-level misdemeanor. It's based generally upon a person's addiction. So what I want to say to somebody, and the programs we're working on now to work with Be Well, is if you agree to go into a program at Be Well or any other facility, it could be in a private insurance or not, you might be through the healthcare agency for an indigent. If you complete that program and you're working on your addiction, if you successfully complete that program, I will dismiss the charges against you. My interest is not getting a conviction. My interest is on these lower level crimes is keeping people from doing it over and over and over again. So I know the sheriff's department is working on a program at Be Well, but we're ramping up Be Well. I sit on a committee or a group called the Orange County Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and we are now in these very vibrant discussions about how we can integrate and use Be Well. But Be Well is, we can't just have one campus like a Be Well for the entire county with 3.3 million people. So we need to get that off the ground, make sure it's working successfully. And then we need to build a similar type of facility, probably closer to, South Orange County, and serve that entire community as well. So the exact numbers I can't tell you, but I can just tell you that we are ramping up, and at some point, it needs to be and should be very vibrant.
And if somebody wanted to follow up, who is operating that facility, the county, or is it another nonprofit?
So Hoag and a consortium of other healthcare providers are running it on contract. But if you go to the county's healthcare agency website, there's a whole slew of information about Be Well on the healthcare agency website. And if you just go to the county's main web, you don't find it there, and just go to the search engine and put in Be Well, you'll be able to find all that information, who to talk to, how to follow up, things like that.
Great. What's been the current success rate with prosecutions and convictions with your since you've been in office?
So we enjoy a very, very high conviction rate. But again, one of the emphasis, like I said, when I started in the practice of law here, and I think there's been too much emphasis on conviction rate. So when I was evaluated as a prosecutor, they looked at a couple things. What is your conviction rate? What is your trials? How many trials? Because we're a trial law firm. And I changed that model in my evaluation of my prosecutors. So instead of focusing so much on being hell bent to get a conviction. See, to me, it's not just your conviction rate. It's what have you done to solve a problem for society? How have you made, like that person I gave the example, under the influence? How have you made that person better? So maybe I didn't get a conviction. I had a dismissal. Does that mean I was less or more successful in protecting the public? See, I think I don't have a conviction. I don't have that stat, but I would argue society is safer because that person is not in and out of the system as a drug addict. So our conviction rate has always been in the high 90s. And COVID has skewed everything. You know, half of my time in office, or time, actually, I've been in office a little over 2 years. A year and a half is COVID. So the courts were closed. We pushed cases out. You know, we did a lot of trials during COVID, but so many of the numbers are skewed just because COVID threw everything into disarray. But we've always enjoyed, a conviction rate in the 90s. But that is not my emphasis anymore as a district attorney. Now, for serious and violent crimes, yes. But for low-level offenses where we're trying to change human behavior, I have a whole different emphasis.
That's great information to have, and it is a completely different way of evaluating. Is there a way to measure the crime rate, and has crime gone up or down during COVID-19?
So that's a very interesting question, actually, because we know that child abuse and elder abuse went up, but only because it was not reported. In other words, because people were locked down in their homes, there was a lot more opportunity for abuse, and there was less opportunity for reporting. So if, let's say you're a child and you're being abused by one of your parents. Well, when you go to school and you're in a classroom, that teacher is a mandatory reporter. When you're elderly and you go to the bank and let's say you're accompanied to the bank by your adult child, and you make a withdrawal of $50,000, that teller is a mandatory reporter to say, wait a minute, your withdrawal history has been, $100 at a time for the last 20 years on your account. You're pulling 50,000, you buying a house? So then the police get called and the police can investigate. Why is your adult child want you to pull $50,000 out of your account? With elderly not doing banking, just like kids not going to school, we didn't have that interaction with the mandatory reporters. So now we're getting a lot more reports of this abuse that had gone unreported because of COVID. And I predicted that was going to happen very early on during the pandemic, which is why I encourage people who are not mandatory reporters, next door neighbors, things like that. If you see something in that regard, then I was asking people to report it on their own, just as a precaution, because it would be better to have it investigated and have it be a nothing than have it not being investigated, right? And you have people who are abused.
Absolutely. Now, I've known you as you've held multiple different offices. Tell me a little bit about the difference being in the legislative branch, whether as the school board, the supervisor, or as a state legislator, and now being in the judicial branch of government, but yet as an elected official.
So I appreciate that question. It's really, I've had a very, very interesting career. When you're a school board member, that was my first office, Brea Olinda School, Unified School District. That was 1992. And so when you're a school board member, your job is to allow the managers to run the school district, the superintendent, assistant superintendent, and the like, school principals. And then your job is to set policy and let those people implement the policy. In the legislature, you're working on laws and trying to solve problems, but you're in the legislative branch, and it's the executive branch that actually implements the policies, whether it's California Department of Corrections, Social Services Agency, those people run those agencies. On the Board of Supervisors, I oversaw 18,000 employees in the county, but we had professional staff. We had a CEO, and his job or her job was the day-to-day running of that particular agency. Our job was to supervise that but let people run these agencies. Although being a county supervisor is a lot more hands-on because it's a full-time job in contrast to, say, the school board. So, and remember that Board of Supervisors is both it's an executive function in the sense that, and legislative, because you're making laws, you're allowed to pass ordinances, and you also are overseeing the implementation of policy. The district attorney, by contrast, I'm a department head and I'm responsible for the day-to-day running, not oversee, like I'm running a huge agency, a huge bureaucracy that has significant responsibilities, as I explained earlier in my presentation, the number of cases, the number of employees and everything else. So when you have 900 employees, you're running a little city, and you have all the problems that come with any other agency. You know, you have HR department, HR issues, you have employee issues, you have to hire and terminate, you have to deal with policies, sick leave, vacation. So it is what probably one of the most fulfilling jobs I've had, but one of the most intense jobs, because you're not just telling other people what to do, like being a county supervisor, but you're actually running and responsible for the day-to-day operations of a huge, huge, huge agency. So it is a very, very different kind of job. And if you've never run a large agency like I did when I was a state legislature overseeing the state, bureaucracy, or as a county supervisor especially, then you have no idea what you're talking about when you say you could run an agency like this if you've never had those kinds of experiences, because you can't just transition from the private sector world and then suddenly be responsible for running a big agency. When, say, for example, you ran your own law firm as a sole practitioner, which means you were by yourself in the office. You didn't manage anybody, or you managed maybe a few people in your life, but you mostly were working for other people. This is a whole different scenario with huge responsibility.
I have two more questions for you. I don't think we have any more in the Q&A, although please add them there if you do have a question. One goes back to your DNA, and DNA and medical science has changed so much the way crimes are being investigated. Do you have a whole team of medical professionals working under you as well?
So I have, so the DNA, I have scientists. I have people with expertise in terms of the science of DNA. My lab, I have, so let's say, for example, there's a crime in Fullerton. And so let's say we have blood splatter, and we're trying to figure out, we have somebody who was injured. There's a lot of blood. Let's say it was a stabbing. So that would be a large amount of a specimen that we could send to the Orange County Crime Lab for what we call forensic analysis. That's like, it's scientifically admissible evidence in the court of law. I can take another part of that sample. I have machines that are called rapid DNA, and I can run that blood sample through my machine in 2 or 3 hours. And I can run that DNA as against the entire DNA database that I have. I have about 180,000 samples from my DNA program, as well as this the state database. And I can come up with a profile of a suspect sometimes within 2 or 3 hours and give that to the police. Now, that is not admissible in court, but it gives the police a lead on who their suspect might be, and it gets them right to being able to solve that case within hours, as opposed to the DNA, which goes to the crime lab, could take weeks or months to analyze. So we are audited. We have very, very stringent oversight requirements, which we should, and we have lawyers who run those departments who have expertise in both science and specifically with DNA.
And then my final kind of to wrap it up is, because we're really focused on business and making business places more friendly. what are you seeing as the greatest crime against businesses these days? Is it still check fraud, or are there other things? And then part two, does your department get involved in ransomware and cybercrime, or is that another federal level?
So, the legislature has been cruel to business. In San Francisco, the DA there is a gentleman named Chesa Boudin. He's of the same kind of philosophy as George Gascon, the DA of LA. He doesn't prosecute theft in San Francisco. So if you own a business, a retail, and somebody walks in your store and steals less than $950, which is now the law, what it used to be $400, is the difference between petty theft, a misdemeanor, and grand theft, a felony. It's now $950, and you could do it every single day. So on Monday you could do $950, Tuesday $950, Wednesday, and it never adds up as a prior conviction because they eliminated that ability to make it a felony as well. So the Walgreens in San Francisco has 10 stores. They're closing all their stores because they were suffering about $1,000 a day in losses. And at some point, you can't suffer $1,000 a day and pay minimum wage or whatever they pay and keep your storefront open. And the problem in DA's offices in San Francisco and LA is they believe that these individuals basically deserve that property because those people are actually the victims because they're on the street as homeless, or they don't have a job and they need the property more than you do. And that's what's happening in society today. We're becoming a society of robbing Peter to pay Paul and Robin Hood, that DAs are making moral judgments about who deserves property and who doesn't. My dad was a small business owner. He owned a pharmacy in La Habra, and I worked at his pharmacy, and my dad owned that pharmacy for over 30 years. And I cannot imagine in my wildest dreams not prosecuting shoplifters and holding people accountable who steal. Just can't imagine it. So I think California is incredibly non-business friendly, and whether it's through tax policy or other, it's so difficult to be in business today. The fact that a chamber basically serves small business owners and people who produce jobs, and we know small business produces more jobs than large corporate business in America. I mean, the backbone of American business is small business. So I really am amazed that people still can start businesses and develop business and be successful in California because it's such a punitive state. In terms of like real estate fraud and economic crimes, yeah, my office prosecutes those. You're right, the new frontier. Listen, if we end hard cash currency and we go to all electronic currency like Bitcoin or any those kinds of things, there's going to be so much fraud. It's going to be unbelievable because we're literally going to do all of our transactions electronically, and the government is going to know everything you do and every place you have a transaction. Your privacy is going to be completely gone because there won't be any cash transactions in the future. And I just see the world. My philosophy is this, like whether it's guns, I always believe if you outlaw guns, the criminals can get the guns. If you create a system where everything is electronic, there's always people who are smart enough to commit fraud, always, no matter what system you develop, right? Software, Norton software, or you run your firewalls. Somebody is always trying to figure out how to rip us off. And you need to have prosecutors who are, willing to be vigorous to stop that. Because if you send the message, it's okay to steal, guess what? People will steal. And that's where we start having chaos in society. And that's where we get to look what's happening today with the with COVID assistance from the government. People are making more money now with government assistance not working than they are to go work. That's why we're having a problem having businesses hire people at $12 or $13 an hour, because people are getting paid more by the government than they are from the private sector. So we've got some serious problems, and California in particular is, I think, not very business friendly at all. But be that as it may, Yeah, this office, we have a, like I said, an investigation unit. We are getting more and more sophisticated about prosecuting those cyber crimes. But as you well know, Teresa, the amount of cyber crime is so overwhelming. It's overwhelming both the FBI and your local police and prosecutors' offices. So we're going to need a lot more resources, but we'll be shifting from traditional prosecutions in the future to these more sophisticated kind of futuristic crimes. But those futuristic crimes are here now.
Great. Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Todd,
you
for
very
a
much.
great, very informative presentation.
Great, thank you.
I look forward to working with you and your staff in the future. And as I step into the retirement world, I definitely will not be going away. So thank you again. And I look forward to hearing more about you and your office in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and congratulations in your retirement.
Thank you. Thank you. Stay tuned and have a great day in North Orange County, and look forward to more broadcasts as my successor, Andrew Gregson, hopefully will continue these programs and bringing you informative information. Thanks so much and have a great weekend.